Minister, we met, we had a long conversation, very honest, and I tell you what I'm touched, and I sincerely, about Lithuania. I met the Prime Minister, all of them have been two physicists, one economist, civil servant that came, scientist, and when I met you, you told me you've been essentially a civil servant that all of a sudden became a minister, and I think something about civil servant that committed to a path, it's very enlightening in the problematic world. But the question I ask you first, resources. You told me that when I talk the story of success of Finland, that is known for its exceptional education, that they give good salaries to the teacher, and they give freedom to the headmasters, and they're the top of the world. And you reflected that the salaries here are very, very good. You are in negotiation, of course. And before we move further, what do you think is the problem right today with the basic elementary education in order to lift it further? What is really the binding constraint? Minister, please. And you can say everything you say as well.
Well, of course, resources is still an issue. And what I'm very happy about, that political parties came with an agreement for education and science to continue the path this government started. And funding is a key point we always discuss about. And for example, for education, for teacher salaries, funding increased, I'd say, dramatically in the recent years.
Can you give us a bit the numbers? Because you told me it's very amazing about the trajectory of the increasing of salary of teachers in Lithuania over time.
In last 3 years, average salary of teachers increased by 40%. And currently, teacher salary compared to average salary in Lithuania is 1.16. And I know that Estonia is trying to negotiate to come with an agreement to have a goal to reach 1.2. Our goal for next year is to reach 1.3, 130% compared teacher salary.
Always below, always above Estonia, yes.
Well, we were first ones who came with an agreement. And for lecturers in universities and colleges, we have a goal to reach 150% next year. Of course, this dramatic increase doesn't feel like a dramatic increase because average salary was rising quite significantly in that period. But for next year, we plan to increase salaries twice, in January and in September. So we could reach that goal before the end of this government.
So do you think there's enough young, bright people that would like to be teachers, but you have no problem right now?
Of course, there are always issues and challenges, but what we can see in statistics, like this year, admission to higher education for teachers' professions increased twice in last 2 years, and specializations to which they go reflect teachers' population quite well. Like 10 years ago, it was a very big issue, as almost all teachers prepared in universities were physical education, arts, English, and basically that's it. And now we have all STEM teachers and so on. However, well, the common understanding in society feels like it's very bad to be a teacher because we know that we have to complain how bad it is, so government will keep increasing salaries. If at some point we say, well, it's quite good now, they will stop increasing salaries, so we always have to say it's very bad, very bad.
Negotiation is true.
So those young people start to think maybe it is bad, but I'm glad that they see statistics, what are the actual salaries, and they start choosing these professions. And compared to 10 years ago, most of young students admitted to teachers' professions were with the lowest grades from school. it was terrible situation. Currently, average score for those who get admitted to teachers programs are better than law, social sciences, better than engineering. It's very similar to IT. So it's one of the best, not like in medical studies, but still quite good. So we have quantity and we have quality. But of course, population of teachers are aging, and we will need more teachers. But I hope we are on the right path.
Before I think that Nerijus is jumping, I'll give you one question short, and because I want to continue to investigate this. Please say your point.
About salaries, because I'm running school and hiring teachers, and I don't know how you count this data, but teacher usually full-time job is 36 hours, 18 lessons contact and 18 hours non-contact, and the teacher who gets 1,500 usually has like 23 or 24 lessons per week. So it means that 1.5 full-time, it's not full-time, it's 1.5 working hours load per week. So if you're comparing, he or she is getting 1,500, so it's a lot, but we need to talk that he working more than needs to work, so it's less time.
Your point is an efficient
and less time for students, for
Understand.
parents, and so on.
But is it so much worse than Finland?
No.
Please.
I would probably add, I completely agree with the minister that the situation is improving, but there is a saying that culture eats policy for breakfast, which usually means that if you have some kind of policies, but the culture inside the population made different changes, what we actually see is a lack of teachers. And we can never get a very good educational system if we don't have a pool of good teachers. So what is happening, for example, in Vilnius, we have a quarter of the whole school population. So the quarter of all the teachers are inside the Vilnius, and more than a quarter of all pupils are inside the Vilnius. And Vilnius salary, average salary is 130% of the average of the country. So Nerijus school is in Vilnius as well, and because Vilnius average is above, the national average doesn't count here.
So basically, when you look at Vilnius, because it's the relative thing, you don't attract good teachers today, you think?
I see the numbers. We might attract good teachers that are in schools, but we have started this school year with about 400 teachers lacking. Of those, about 80 are in kindergartens, let's say 20 mathematics teachers, 20 Lithuanian language teachers. I already know that there are schools who are getting 3 classes together in a sized room of, let's say, half of this, and getting the classes together because they don't have a teacher.
So what do your recommendation? He may not be a minister after the next election, but assume he will. What will you do? Would you increase more the salaries, or there's something else you have to do about it?
Well, first thing is, of course, increasing salaries, but it's a funny story about lacking teachers. What do we call a shortage of teachers? It should be supply minus demand. And if it's negative supply, so when there is a shortage. But when we look at the data, we don't see job advertising, we don't see anything about lackage of teachers in schools. Currently, we have 31 open positions for teachers in whole Lithuania. But we hear for that in Vilnius there are hundreds of open positions. And sometimes we hear that one head of school tells his success story that he announced an open position and he attracted a lot of interest. But there are some heads of schools that there is an open position and he makes calls for someone he knows, teachers who got retired or who left the school, and ask maybe you want to come, but they don't announce an open position. So it looks like a basic thing to do, but there is still not done in many of schools. So we don't see in statistics that.
It's basically the question, you have some disagreement about the shortage, but I want to move just forward. What do you think is missing then today in Vilnius, in Lithuania, in order to do the shift in the improvement of human capital, and now you can, of course, talk because you satisfied somehow with elementary education and maybe secondary, but can you also reflect on what people express as shortage of funding for new research and the universities, and what is the policies of the future compared to the past regarding universities and that relationship to the surrounding environment?
It will be interesting to hear from representative from university.
Really?
Do they see changes we are implementing? Because funding in 3 years for research, it doubled in 3 years. It was less than 150 millions. This year is 276 millions from state budget. And on top of that, we have from RRF, from European funds, investments for R&D. And of course, we are increasing basic funding for research, but we are making a lot of new programs. One of them is mission-orientated science and innovation programs, where together consortiums made from at least 2 universities and at least 2 business enterprises are getting an idea what kind of problem in society they could solve, and they can come up with different ways to solve this problem for green transformation, for digital transformation, for health, and so on. So this is one way. Another thing is what we are encouraging and making programs to fund common projects with foreign partners. Now we have new agreements with colleagues from Taiwan for laser physics, for life sciences, in the fields where we are pretty successful, but in Lithuania we are good at basic research, but we are not that good in translating research into innovation. And Taiwan is opposite. They didn't invest that much in basic research, but they are very good to make innovations out of research. And I think in cooperation between these 2 countries and researchers, it will help us to move forward.
Thank you.
So we are investing in different areas in research because we already have quite good laboratories, and now we have a new program to...
Before I move to Alison, I just want to last question. Assume, which probably you may not decide to continue in politics, but let's assume, economists always use, let's assume that you will be the Minister of Education for the next 4 or 5 years. You think this pace that you're doing now will be really sufficient for transforming Lithuania into the first 5 states in the world? What do you do if you say, I now have 10 years, 5-10 years, and I'm running education? Would you do the same thing, what you do today? Or do you do something differently?
I had to do something different.
Which is?
It's not only about funding. I think in terms of funding, we are in pretty good situation because of this agreement, political, and I hope it will continue to increase. But ministers in the Ministry of Education, Science and Sport changes on average every 2 years. So it's quite difficult to do a big change. For example, renewing curricula, it started 4 ministers ago, let's count it that way, and now we have to finish. And when you start something, you plan funding, you agree to finish. If you don't finish the way it was started, not only you have to find new funding, but you also have to compensate the money which was spent to the programs because it was planned that way, so you have to finish that way. And a lot of things, you just have to finish what others started, and you can plant seeds so that others will finish what you started. So it's quite difficult. And for example, in higher education and science, in policy changes, we embedded in the law changes until up to 2029. Some of them will be in effect in 2 years, some of them in 5, in 7 years. And you have to plan strictly because you want to do it but you need time for preparation. Otherwise, we had some good ideas how to change, for example, higher education evaluation, but then we went to constitutional court. It was too fast, nobody was prepared, and so on. So we learned from previous ministers' mistakes, and now we plan quite long ahead.
Well, thank you, Minister Gintautas. And now I'll move to Alison Wolf, that her career and reputation is so much about higher education, its future. So Alison, you reflected in Britain and worldwide on higher education in a world is changing in all dimensions. Can you give us your assessment, what's happening around, and if you have some words of wisdom for Lithuania?
I don't know if I have any. I have no silver bullets, but I'm the real out-of-towner on this panel, and I think, like everybody else whom Avishay has invited and brought to this wonderful conference, it has been amazing to see Vilnius and to see what Lithuania has achieved. And sitting here and having that as background and listening to this, and also listening to the presentations, I think that in the higher education sector, you have crystallized one of the major dilemmas of higher education in the world today, because what we have heard time and time again is the importance of R&D, the fact that basically our fate as individual countries and our fate as the world is going to depend to a huge extent on whether or not we are able to make technological breakthroughs that are based on basic research. And it is worth remembering that the first industrial revolution had nothing to do with universities. I mean, like really nothing. And today universities are absolutely central to this. But a part of that centrality is the globalization of higher education. And particularly in STEM subjects, which are the ones which we've been really talking about, it is genuinely global and it is very expensive. And one of your former prime ministers was saying how lovely it would be to have a top 50 university in Lithuania. And I mean, honestly, truly, I think that's not the way to think about it. But it also does crystallize this dilemma, because, of course, what universities were in the past and what they still need to be, particularly for a small country which has done wonderfully well because of its human capital, but also because, it seems to me, you feel intensely Lithuanian. You want this country to succeed and you want it to be the best that it can be. And there is a tremendous tension in the modern world between the role of universities as the place where local elites are formed and being an outward-facing, science-based, global R&D university. And this isn't something you can solve, but I think it's something you have to be very, very conscious of in balancing it. And at one extreme, you could go the French route, which you have path dependency, but France is the one which, in a way, has kept its elite formation completely distinctive. So if you are a really, really, really able French young person, you will probably go to one of the grandes écoles, which are not universities, but are fantastically good teaching institutions. At the other extreme, if you are a young American, or even to some extent a young Brit, there isn't the same tension, because you go to a global university, which is highly international and very large, and has a huge budget. But I think that for you it is a real tension which you need to think about, because it's also related to the language of teaching. And this has become a real political issue in, for example, Belgium and the Netherlands. Do you teach in English or do you teach in Lithuanian? And having done a little bit of mugging up on the history of your great university, this is something about which maybe you can say a little bit more, Mr. Chancellor. But once what language of instruction it was allowed to use was a major political issue for good reason. So I do think this is a real tension. But it's also true that you have to think about how to keep your what the Americans used to call the best and the brightest here. Because, if you are a loving, ambitious, moderately well-off parent of a talented child, you want the best for them. And what you do in the modern world is you look at the league tables. And, again, I can vouch for this because I teach at a university which is not number 1 or number 2, but it's right up there. And if I ask my students, did you know which position King's was in on the tables before you applied? Yeah, of course they did. It's not the only reason they come, but of course they did, and they do. And therefore, I think that this is the other tension, and it goes back to the endless budget questions, which is that one of the other real challenge for any modern country, and this one is not particularly for a small country, is this trade-off between access for the vast majority of the population, which is also totally new, and the price of excellence. And it is almost impossible in countries which have demographics which are against us, so we have declining numbers of young people, huge health bills. It becomes harder and harder to pay for higher education at the cost level which it requires to provide a truly, not merely excellent, but globally competitive, excellent education. So I think these are genuine dilemmas for which I don't have an answer. But we were talking about this the other evening, and I mean, one of the things I think is inherent in what you've said, which is that you have to specialize. It means that you may lose some of your best young people to other universities in other countries. But the really building on what is most characteristic of modern universities, which is that they are plugged in not just to R&D at a global level, but into local business in a way that for a significant number of your young people, there is a route that is both local and globally excellent. I mean, it's hard to do. It's really hard to do. If you're running a university, it's mostly about balancing this year's budget. And, as an ex-member of my own council, I mean, it's everything feels driven by that. But I think you encapsulate both the best and the most challenging of higher education in the world today.
Thank you, Alison. Just I tell you a comment that many years ago there was a suggestion the Hebrew University was the best university and the oldest and the biggest in Israel, and there was a suggestion that they will start doing all the masters and everything, attract people from all over the world, particularly Jews, in English. But then, no, it's Hebrew. The way it's Lithuania, it's the national pride. But the way it was global, if it's been opening, they could have been lifted to the sky. But again, this is a cultural identity question where people have to say. I thank you, but I would like to move. I was lucky 2 years ago to meet the prorector Artūras Vasiliauskas, and we discussed some of this issue, and now we meet again. And I'd like him to reflect after he listened to the minister and to Alison, and seeing the success that we have in Lithuania, but the shortages. But in particular, sometimes when you look at the new artificial intelligence and the ChatGPT, ask yourself, why so many old professors and young professors all the time using the same sheets to read and give the teachers? Maybe we are also in such a global revolution that will change all universities, and then maybe in this transformation it can be helpful to be at a smaller size. I don't know, but prorector, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Avishay. Well, we moved from humans to machines. Very natural. Well, I think talking about ChatGPT and other tools, artificial intelligence tools, they are inevitable. People will use them. Students are already using them. Lecturers are using them. I am using. I confess. I mean, I needed to write a sort of a nasty but diplomatic letter to an international institution, which was not delivering what we needed. And I asked ChatGPT, use diplomatic tone, but be critical. And I got 20 seconds. I got 5 seconds. I mean, I sent it. Because I still control the content.
Yes.
If I get something from a source, I don't treat it as a truth. Or as a source of wisdom, I just use it as a tool, And for me, I don't know, Soviet encyclopedia, Wikipedia, ChatGPT, they are a bit similar, you know. You can misuse them. So that encyclopedia lies, Wikipedia is not sufficient, you know. ChatGPT hallucinates, you know. If I do not distinguish between these things, you know, this is my problem, not the problem of the tools. I mean, if you take two most innocent, wonderful tools, hammer and sickle, you know, they are wonderful, but then they were crossed and misused for other reasons, you know. So it's, my point is that in university we will have to adopt all new things. If universities do not catch up with technologies, with inventions, we will not be in.
But what are you and the rector and the leadership are doing for all of that University of Vilnius, and giving the point that was raised 2 years ago when we met, and raised there, that in spite of the dilemma of scale, etc., in order to create a hub around University of Vilnius and other, for example, that we lift biotech, etc., and have focal research center, that you need more resources. Are you getting enough? Where you'll get them from? What is your vision for this transformation to take place in the next 5 years?
Well, I think the minister explained already that a lot of things are being done. Funding is increasing for research, for salaries. Actually, around 80% of university budget goes to salaries at Vilnius University. So not much left for anything else. But, you know, resources are always limited. And we agree with that. But one of the approaches which already worked in Lithuania is a sort of at least a targeted funding of infrastructure, of research infrastructure. And our best example, which is well known, is a Life Sciences Center at Vilnius University. It was renovated 6 years ago, and the results are apparent. The new alliances between businesses and big companies, biotech companies, and Vilnius University are delivering huge results. Yes. So this is one point. Another point is, of course, as I say, resources will be limited, but we also need to do something else. And I think in our university leadership, we assume that we need to do urgently two things. One is we should internationalize university a bit more. And I don't mean only attracting international students. It's important to attract international students, have a more diverse environment, but also attracting international research capacities and creating the world here. Why Lithuanian young people are leaving to other countries to study? Because they want the world. And we need to create the world here in Vilnius University. So they don't leave the country, but they live in the world. You know, they study in Lithuanian and in English. English is not an enemy for us, you know. English is a window to the world, you know.
Also, yes.
Yeah. So, and I think in Lithuania we still have two understandings of our culture. One is that we should close down and protect ourselves from anything else which comes from outside, and another one is to open up and use opportunities. So English is one of our opportunities. It's a global skill, nothing else. We will not forget Lithuanian language by using English. I hope so, you know, and I'm sure of that. So internationalizing and creating the world here in Lithuania, so the young people stay here. And another point is, which is very important, is that universities, by their nature, they are incredibly diverse institutions in terms of knowledge, first of all. They are interdisciplinary institutions. People with very different, you know, research backgrounds, understandings on the world, they are together. So our role is to facilitate their cooperation, to bring, you know, to build interdisciplinary bridges, to create interdisciplinary coalitions in addressing the issues of the world. And universities can play a unique role in that. I think that no one other institution can provide such a deep and broad understanding of, sustainability issues. We can bring people from humanities, from social sciences, from natural sciences, which can advise the governments, you know, on a daily basis, on a structural basis.
My question, Artūras, you say what should be done. Yeah. Now, for example, you gave the example that you are good in basic research. You say that Taiwanese are good in innovation. Therefore, it takes two for tango and you marry each other. The question, can you do this marriage inside Vilnius? That's At the same time, you do basic research. If you create relationship with business that might be a bit impatient, and you create a technological park. I gave you example from Israel. My example to do it in Israel was when I get my PhD at Stanford, what Silicon Valley is. Because you have good group in bio, you have this. In order to do that, you need a vision that will go beyond that, including the resources and the involvement of the wealthy people, the business community. Is somebody sitting and just thinking to create this interconnectedness group that can lift with all the constraint, rather than saying, okay, I'll do the same, I'll find Taiwanese, I'll find that. Why not do it in a house? Because it's feasible.
Well, I agree. I think the main issue is that we lack middle people who are capable to do that, bring together businesses and science and research and connect them into the sort
You
of
don't lack,
innovation.
believe me, people are everywhere. The question is leadership. So the question is, okay, please, Minister, yes, and taught us.
That's the reason we created these mission-oriented research and innovation programs, where consortiums must be made of universities and business enterprise. The usual thing that people in university think, well, there is nothing to cooperate with businesses about. They don't write research articles and they're not interested in publishing it. And we hear from a business part that, these dudes from universities, they just care about publishing and they don't care about how to make use of what they do. But when they get an actual issue to work on, and then they say, okay, you do on publishing part because you need approval from academic society that what you do is a right way. And you have a business who are trying to do prototypes, making some innovations and so on. But they are together, but doing different things. Usually it was thought that cooperation means together doing the same thing. But now I think it's shifting mindset that you are never going to do the same thing, but you're going to do for the same purpose different things and do it together. And I think it's changing in universities.
That's very good, because the truth of the matter that the past, the history in my country, people do basic research. And then when somebody starts doing something applied, they look to him like a heresy, something wrong. And then this culture shifted totally now maybe in the other wrong direction, because all of a sudden people start creating the basis for startups. Some became millionaires, etc. And university got tilted a little bit to the other side, that fewer people doing basic research, which is the basis eventually to transformation. Alison, you want to add on that?
Well, I think I'm in full agreement with the minister. Universities don't produce products. No. I mean, taking somebody's idea to the point where it goes to market, it's a long process. It involves very different skills. And I also think that, in fact, it's not that difficult to create a sort of startup culture in universities, because most academics are ambitious. On the other hand, you make your own academic career through publishing, but you also would very much like to have something which then takes that stage. But I think it's, in that context, it's very important to understand that if you think of Silicon Valley, it's not that Stanford University created these businesses, but it is, again, it comes back to my point about having some sort of critical mass. If you are in a particular area, you will want to set up near a university which is producing highly skilled people that you can hire. And I think it's really important to be aware that these are different stages. And the really difficult thing, I say this again for a small country, is that you cannot do it in everything, and yet you don't want, to use the English cliche, to put all your eggs in one basket.
Diversification.
And I think that is going to be the most difficult balancing act in the next few years, because it's not just about how much money the government can give the university to help it get going. It's also the other well-attested fact that asking government to spot winners is usually not something with a terribly happy ending. And I think balancing that is going to be hard. I mean, you know, sitting here, you look often to Scandinavians, to Finland, to Sweden,
Denmark,
and Denmark, and I think that's a very good place to look. They have had the advantage that they've had a lot longer to do this in. But I think the thing I would definitely strongly agree with the Minister over is that there are things that one does well in a university, and there are things that are done well by business. And it's not about asking business to come and set up something inside
no,
the institution.
it's separately, because university is not a business. I have some people on board that thought university should run like business. University, business, but when you connect an environment that you can shift out of that, then the sky is the limit. And I would like now to ask the two younger people that focus on the basic education but reflect on everything you want. And we'll start with the 700 years for Vilnius. You are in charge of education in Vilnius. Please.
Many ideas to discuss. One thing I wanted to expand on, what is needed for that inclusive growth we
Yes.
had in the discussion, is that when we talk about applied universities, let's say, or applications of university research, we usually talk about businesses and startups and so on. What I also think I'm lacking in Lithuania is policy advice based on research from universities. And I was just recently this week looking over, let's say, Columbia University in New York, and their teacher faculty even have, you know, certain areas we work on is policy advice for certain reasons, because they done research on certain topics, and they, you know, actually push for that and lobby for certain things that are needed in education. I know that in UK, let's say, in early childhood education, scientists have signed documents advising to postpone the early entry into primary school education. Not successfully, but at least they tried, you know? So what we really often see is that academics publish papers, not everyone reads them, and usually they're, you know, with small margins that you have to look into. Instead, what is really important is to collect those evidence as well and to show how you can apply them. So in education science, you might not get a startup, but you might, you know, argue for certain policies to be changed inside society.
I think the minister has something now to reflect.
Yes, that's a very good case, actually. When we're thinking what to do if we want to be top 5, we have to change policy making. Because now when I come with a reform I want to do, the first question is what countries already has it? And if you don't name enough, then it's dead. It won't go ahead, this reform. So if most of countries already has it, if you make it, you will be in the bottom half.
Yes.
But if they would look for a reform which was never done by any country, you could expect to be the first one to do something new, which was never done, and then you can expect to be in this top 5 or top 3. And where to get these ideas, what to do, which was never done, is to look into what research was done, what ideas we can adopt, and big countries envy for us because we can do things quite fast, and this policy can change way faster, and we can make nationwide things way faster than huge countries. Just
Artūras, you wanted to reflect, and then I move to Nerijus that he wants to do a revolution here. But please.
Well, very brief reflection addressing Una's point that, you know, at this stage there are very encouraging signs that the government is listening to universities. Vilnius University and other universities, where we work together with the government to develop the Vision 2050 for Lithuania. And, you know, it's 27 years ahead, and it's a long-term thing, and it will become a law. Of course, it will be developed by the parliament further into the more legal form, and it will be adopted, I guess, this year. But there are encouraging signs that they're doing that. Yeah.
Nerijus, should you tell the audience what you told me? How did you find yourself in the only new democratic school? Tell about yourself. What did you do, and how you landed, and what is your approach? Tell them something different.
Okay, yeah, I graduate KTU, Kaunas Technology University. I supposed to be engineer, but I also figure out my both hands are left. So I moved to managing things, and I'm in education after spending 6 years in business. So in now more than 10 years I'm in education field, and because it's the most valuable profession. I mean, what can be most valuable? I want to give to society. I want to share. I want to help Lithuanian education system to grow. So that is why sometimes doesn't matter salaries, and it's more about what you do and you feel purpose. So me and colleagues started democratic school with idea.
It's the only democratic school in Lithuania. Explain what it is, what is the size, and what's unique about it.
I know that in Israel now many schools, public schools, turning to be democratic as well.
Now, unfortunately, with this government, they become anti-democratic.
Yeah, but in Lithuania, we at the early beginning, and two main principles. One is social democracy at school. It's mean that each child and teacher and principal making decisions together. We have school council once per week. We meeting and making decisions together.
Are you based it on Steiner, Anthroposophia, or something of this?
It's a democratic education community, and we're following these two principles. So that we put agenda together. We solving problems. We making decisions. Uniforms. Should we wear uniforms or not? Why me should decide what kids should wear?
But my question to you, Nerijus, this is a beautiful thing and unique. The question is this: most of the education here will be public. Therefore, even if you are successful individually, you will save some souls. Can this be a pilot of replication to some of the ideas to be accepted and internalized into the public school system?
Yes, it can be, and it should be, and will be. Even a few hours ago, with Tom from Nord Security Company, very inspiring person and very successful business. And what he said, I give autonomy to my employees. I give autonomy to them, and they delivering. I trust them, and they delivering successful results. Profits. So I think that education should change and give autonomy to the students.
And you think the union
little bit by little bit. It's not like a full autonomy and you decide what and when to learn, but it's learning about yourself, you're learning about your life, you're learning all life. So you need to be in charge, self-directed.
I agree with you fully that it's right. I just say when I look at the overall public and unions and everything, in order to make it very large in quantity, it's very difficult. I think Una wants to reflect on that.
Because in Vilnius we run quite a lot of innovative initiatives.
Yes.
One that really relates to democratic principles is participatory budgeting. So that's the idea that you give certain amount of budget of the school to decide for the students themselves. It's been run in, maybe not so much in schools, but around the world in municipalities, it's been tried out. So last year we tried that with 12 schools in Vilnius, and we're planning to expand every 10 plus 10 schools every year, maybe hopefully more in other years. And what we heard from those schools is that they actually continue to do that even from their own budget, because they see how students get involved, and it's actually easier for the teachers and for the principal and for administration, because they see how involved students get. And when they get involved, they actually also learn more. And that's what research shows, that motivation is like 50% of achievement.
Thank you. There are many distinguished people that sitting here and people that are distinguished but not acknowledged as being distinguished. And you look at Vilnius, everybody here in Lita, when we came, it's so exciting. But can, in a couple of years, a major biocenter based on the research be enlarged and be a place that out of it came also a lot of new ideas? Can, not only in cyber and other things, what you be advised, for example, David Zilberman, the young man from Berkeley, that is probably the public university #1 in the world, public, I said, university in the world, what will be your advice to them? What they should do? And take a microphone. Would you help David with the microphone? Thank you. Dana, do you want also to give some advice? No? Okay. Justus, yes.
What I said...
Speak to the microphone. Thank you. Close, yes.
There was one thing that I said before...
Karov.
Oh, one thing that I said before, and I think is really important, I think try to think about Vilnius as a center, learning center in all this area between Moscow to Berlin or Stockholm. So don't really look at it only, especially when it comes to higher education. Eventually there will be one university that will be the central university of all this area. And the key element is to develop, to get the critical mass, to raise the seed money, let's say $1 billion, which look a lot, but...
I want to make sure, Minister, it was not million. It was billion.
Billion, 1 billion.
The way the French say milliard.
Milliard, 1 billion. It looked a lot, but it's not that much, given the capacity.
Yes.
And start really thinking about developing centers of excellence and developing a program, so within 10 or 15 years, you have something that will be unique and will be leading. That at least will, because then the spillover will be
enormous.
And the reason is this, in the US you have 50 states. You have 2 or 3 states that are above everyone else. It's Massachusetts, California, maybe Texas. And they basically, California started it when it was not the most popular state. They were able to develop this critical mass and they become a regional center. If you look at Europe, again, you have some universities that become regional center. At least in my view, eventually you wouldn't really, especially now after Brexit, you really would like to keep the people here and attract people from other places. So my feeling is that is one key element. And the other element is not only to think about salary to teacher, which is extremely important, but how you develop the curriculum to encourage excellence. If there was one thing that I got from Israel, honestly, was that I went in a high school that really selected for excellence. And for my high school with 80 students, 80 graduating students, you have about 3 Nobel Prize winners and several people that won a lot of other prizes. And the reason that this high school really challenged us. So my feeling is these are 2 ways. Try to go on excellence and try to decide about goals. Let's make it a center, because whoever builds the first centers will have a first moving advantage.
Thank you, David. Justus, from the most successful agricultural universities in Europe, please.
Exactly.
Justus, microphone close.
Yeah, I like to add to what David has said. I think to really build a center and bring all the different sciences at one place. That is a lesson that we learned from Wageningen University. All the research was distributed over the country, and then we had a crisis, so we had to save money. The agriculture was not so popular in the late 1990s. Student numbers went down, and then the government had to save. So what was the result? They concentrated everything at Wageningen to save costs. But then in the end, the result was, because we had everything at one place, communication was short. You could talk with experts in 2 minutes. That we really became one of the top universities in the world in the food, in agriculture and food. And by the way, we are number 3 in environmental sciences in the world. So bringing everything together and focusing on excellence. Yes. That was our success story, and I think that can also work here in Lithuania.
Please, like Artūras, you wanted to add something?
I'd like to comment.
The minister,
both comments, actually.
Yes.
Well, to some extent, we already have, and it's not an institutional arrogance, sorry, but to some extent, we already have a situation that one university is much larger than others. We are a comprehensive university. We lack a bit of engineering, some other things, but mostly we cover most of the areas. And then in terms of the size, just for you to understand, we hold more than 40% of BA students market in Lithuania. So already partially consolidated, But I would like to come back to Alison's point, that it's a very hard political decision between access and excellence.
Yes.
Yeah.
In Lithuania and in many other countries over the last decades, 5 decades, 7 decades, from being elite institutions, universities became powerhouses of a middle class. People joined universities in that way, they joined middle class. And they acquired not only skills and qualifications, they also acquired social confidence, which is necessary to be middle class, I would say. So this is a very hard decision,
Very hard decision.
And I'm not even talking about 2 billion, Minister, can you produce 2 billion, I'm just talking about these tough political decisions.
Thank you.
About
Please.
excellence, this year we just launched a research program for excellence, but universities themselves have to decide in which area they will focus.
Yes.
And what's the outcome? They asked us to postpone it for next year.
I know, well, academician. One of the advice that I have now in my mature years, that I look at the criteria of university, and I might just share with you a little bit, just one thing, that the idea of management by numbers. I think I joined the World Bank, Martin Wolf was already there, when there was a very charismatic, well-known president by the name of Robert McNamara. Now, this Robert McNamara, at the time, I don't know today, years ago, there is the exam to get into America, the school GMAT. And he got GMAT of 800, which probably maybe at the time, 6, 7 people all over the years got. He was brilliant, an accountant. But then the tragedy of McNamara, that later we discuss it after the tragedy with him, he became he started with a motor company and became defense minister for John F. Fitzgerald Kennedy in Vietnam. And since he took from Lord Calvin say, if you cannot measure it, it doesn't exist. And then the traded 2 gurus of management that I'm sure Hollanders know and all the management consultants in Avishay, Peter Drucker and the guy that took over Japan, Deming, repeat, if you cannot measure it, it doesn't exist. So McNamara told his general, give me numbers. So they give him civilians, they give him fake news, and therefore the lesson is, and he admitted it later, you don't manage by numbers. A little by numbers, but also you look at something else. The same thing, the tragedy of academia. I look today, the fact that you promote people, and there are millions of people, so you said the only criteria to promote them is the number of publications. So people write ad infinitum, many of the articles nobody read, they spend their time. I had an advisor, an Englishman, that was the president of the Royal Society, one of the greatest Nobel laureate, Aaron Klug, God bless his memory. And he was advising me, he said, why people should write more than 3 papers for Nature and Science, etc. That's enough, and then they should do things. But what happened with this criteria of the numbers is destroying universities. Therefore, part of the thing is numbers are important, but at a limited fashion. Otherwise, they are very destructive. Alison?
Okay, I want to come back on that one first,
Yes.
because I'd like to say something we do well in Britain. We have a research assessment exercise, and it does not use numbers. It really doesn't. It uses peer review, and it looks at the best production, and it's not just publications of a department. And that's how our research funding gets allocated. Right. And actually, it's labor-intensive, but it's good. You don't have to go into that trap, Avishay. But could I just say a little bit more about the excellence versus success? Because I think this is a real dilemma for modern societies. And with all due respect to David, I mean, one of the problems in the United States is that if you make it into the very top universities, your advantage over everybody else is enormous. Most European countries, including even Britain in comparison, have a flatter profile in terms of how far it affects your future, whether you get into the right course in the right institution.
Except maybe Oxford and Cambridge.
Yeah, Oxford and Cambridge are incredibly important, but it's not as bad as it is in the United States for the top selective institutions compared to everywhere. So this is a genuine dilemma, and you cannot put that genie back. People want their children to have higher education, and they don't want them to have a higher education which is manifestly worse in the less prestigious institutions than it is in the top ones. And this is a major, major dilemma.
And therefore,
which is
what
tied
should
up,
be done?
It's tied up with the future of democracy and citizenship, and I think we shouldn't lose sight of it.
Sure. Une?
I usually say that if I take out at least one point from the discussion, it's a good discussion. So my point to take out of this discussion is actually this dilemma, because I think we don't talk about this in Lithuania. We just say, oh, we want, Vilnius University to be top 400, then top 300, and top 200, and so on. I graduated my bachelor in St Andrews University in Scotland. That's the same path. It used to be Scottish University. It skyrocketed. Very international, very good university, loved it. But I do understand that Scottish students can't get into it. So from the country's perspective, especially small countries' perspective, I would actually argue for not being in top 50, let's say. What previous government did, because I worked there as well, there is a program called Next 100 with an idea to raise the next, the people who will create the next 100 of Lithuania, is to fund studies in the best universities in the world with agreement to come back.
Like what was the Fulbright in the United States that other people, and they couldn't get a visa, but they have to come back.
Yes, and it's still running. I think it's very successful. It could be funded even more, but I think for small countries, that's one of the ways.
Interesting proposition. Mr. Minister, and I think the two young gentlemen there also want to speak.
I just wanted to say that we copy-pasted your research assessment exercise, and we did it 10 years ago. We started as a pilot. Then we made half of the research funding based on it. This year, we made it third round, and 70% of research funding will be based on it. And now we are discussing maybe we should get rid of this bibliometric exercising every year and giving this 30% of funds based on bibliometric results, and making 100% of the funds based on research exercise. So
I think David and Justus wanted to reflect. Anybody else want to reflect from the audience is more than welcome. David, Justus, and please, whoever wants to raise your hand, get the microphone and ask the question. We're coming towards soon closure. David, hold it next to you, yes. No, Anna, please.
Okay, so if I look at the US system, there is a big difference between undergraduate and graduate. My kids went to junior college, which is the lowest of the low, and they went to University of California, Davis, which is not too. So to some extent, if I look at the graduate program, people graduate from a lot of state universities. The big issue is, if you have a elite university, it is a master and a PhD level. And to me, if there is one thing that is deficient in Europe, is a PhD. So if I look at Holland has a PhD that is a magnet to many many other programs. England has Oxford and Cambridge that is a magnet. So you need a base of undergraduate, and there is no difference, in my view, in undergraduate teaching between most universities. But once you go to the master, especially in the PhD, there is a big difference. And the country can keep people if you have a really good PhD program. Now, the system in Scandinavia and Norway and Sweden is very similar to the American system. Their PhD program are much closer to the US and to the rest of Europe. But doing what Holland did, they become, or to some extent Belgium, that they become a center of gravity to a lot of other countries in an area that is looking to a center of gravity is important, because this is an opportunity. In the vacuum now, Russia, that was a center, disappeared. You may replace it.
Very good. I would like Justus, and I like the minister respond. And I think now, finally, Martin and Daniel want to speak. Please, yes.
Right. No, what definitely is important, that the whole population needs to be catered, and that everybody has the opportunity to go to higher education. And there I agree with David that the bachelor programs, they are extremely important that people can join them. You also need the other master and PhD educational systems as well, so that people have the opportunity. Still, it would be very important to also look at excellence, and then have this magnetic effects. When you look at the United States, when you look at MIT, Harvard, how many other similar universities have emerged in that area? Look at California, we observe there the same. And so this can be magnets, and that does not imply that others have no chance. Right?
No, but the point that you raised, David, and I'll give it now to Martin and Daniel, basically you can have a basic education, bachelor degree, that is inclusive and opening to all the population and the level of, but if you want to have a research center that also will be powerful enough to allow even application and transformation that will give also economic benefit, then you have to create a major investment in PhD, in research, in combination, in order to do this lift.
Exactly, and we have to learn from what David was saying with respect to Stanford, have also a proper technology transfer system that basically supports spin-offs. And we have this now in Wageningen, and I'm quite happy to see the successes that we have from this.
Thank you. Martin, would you pass the microphone to Martin?
I just wanted to make a point, and I don't know whether it really fits in with anything anybody else has said. But it relates very directly to what I talked about yesterday, which is the survival of a democratic culture. It seems to me, and I have a section on this in the book, but it's not a dominant one, in the process of creating a mass university system, we created, of course, a mass university educated population. And in the younger generations of our societies, this is now getting towards about half of the population. I think in Korea it's 80, but we'll leave that aside for the moment because Korea is freaking.
It's 80.
The result, without doubt, and I'd be really interested in how people here think about the future, is to create a truly profound cultural split in the middle of the population, right in the middle, between university-educated people who have absorbed the culture of a university, the attitudes of a university on a whole range of issues, and the rest of the population who feel that those people despise them.
Yes.
And the hatred that has caused, along with the declining prospects of this lower half, is, to take one example, why we got Brexit and why the Americans got Trump. And I don't see how one can think about a mass education system in which higher education plays this sort of role. Remember, when I went to university, 5% of the generation went to university. Yes. 5%. 2% 4 years earlier. Now it's 50%. And I don't think one can think intelligently about the survival of a democratic citizenship if you don't think about how you manage that split.
Thank you. Danny, did you want to say something, or just hold the microphone?
I would, of course, and we can continue later, ask you, Martin, and the rest, whether the resentment would be much lower if it was just the 5%.
It was, strangely.
Okay, but
now, had so much more opportunity.
Right,
Yes,
but we're in we're a different
It
era
was.
today,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
Israel
Back.
may be a different case, but that's so. Yeah, I have a more very specific question, and then a quick comment. And that's to your point about making a major investment of sending people abroad and given the range of expertise of this excellent panel. Have you looked at the case study of Cyprus, which for the longest time decided we're not going to have a university. We're a very small country. And
put it, yeah. Yeah, thank you.
We're a very small country. It's much better that we just finance people going abroad. But of course, it was more of the elite and those, but everybody got scholarships, including friends of ours at the World Bank. Remember the Michael Sarrises and all that. All those were educated abroad. Now, it was an extreme case, and now they have evolved, but I assume lessons can be drawn of how Cyprus did it.
Thank you.
The comment I cannot help, given our earlier session and your session, and you mentioning Lord Kelvin, that what cannot be measured cannot be controlled. I think what summarizes...
He said, no, what you cannot measure doesn't exist.
No, he said, Lord Kelvin, or the temperature, said you cannot control it.
Okay, thank you.
But I think what encapsulates so richly what you have said is what Einstein said. Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts.
Beautiful. And I will share with you a fantastic story because, the father of Danny, Hans Kaufmann, the grandfather, they are from Germany. They fled when Hitler came. And he was 19. He wrote a letter from Chile to Albert Einstein, calling him that he should mobilize the Jews and everything, and Einstein responded to him that he didn't think it was such a good proposition. And it was a year ago that this special letter was contributed by all the Kaufmann to the museum in Berlin, and there was a very wonderful conference reflecting on Einstein, and all the Kaufmann descendants came to Berlin, and I was fortunate also to be there. So that's an interesting story. Justus, it's important, otherwise I'll let them close. Speak, please.
Yes, it's not to be misunderstood. I fully agree with what Martin has said. Not everybody will go to university, and countries have to develop also opportunities for those who do not go to university. You need to have this other way of education. For example, what you have in the Netherlands and Germany, I think also in other countries, training on the job, with the opportunity that through this kind of training, you still have the possibility to also enter the university system, so that there is still the possibility to have options. Right, to discourage people if they cannot move upward, and then we get the situation where people get discouraged and only see a divide within their country. So that is very important, and that requires that we have early education, secondary education. These systems have to be also very well developed so that people still have opportunities for the future.
Thank you. I think we are -1 minute on the time, and Rolandus is very punctual, but I would like each of the panel members, because I tell you frankly, I think not only me, but I think all my friends that never been to Vilnius the first time were mesmerized by the civility, the passion here, and what you accomplished. So I'll tell you, if you will continue in this transformation, I think each of us in our capacity, and I speak on behalf of my friends without talking to them, I'm sure we'll try to support in that way or the other your magnificent transformation. And in that, each of you can have a closing sentence, and we'll close this panel. Mr. Minister?
Well, thank you for a very interesting discussion. There are a lot of things that I still want to say, but I just want to share one example, since now I talk with a lot of teachers, and you touched the ChatGPT question. I talked with 3 different teachers about what you're doing in school about ChatGPT. One of them said, nothing. We are just ignoring it. We'll deal with it later when someone tells us how to do it. Another teacher said, I'm putting my effort how to try to catch when student is using ChatGPT to do his homework, to write his articles, and so on. And the third teacher said that, well, I gave the same assignment for 2 different groups and told for them to use ChatGPT to solve it, and another one without doing it. And then to make a presentation of this article in front of class. And I didn't tell for the rest of the class which group used ChatGPT and which of them didn't use. And then we discussed, how did you feel presenting something you didn't produce yourself? How the group felt that they are hearing presentation, but presenter can't answer anything which is close to this topic, but not in the article, and taught them a lesson of learning that it matters not only the final thing, the article you produce, because when you try to produce an article, you read thousands of pages and you make 2 pages, and you can talk about everything else what's not in the article, and the article is just the last thing you do, and learning process is way more important than delivering the last thing. And used ChatGPT to teach a lesson instead of ignoring it or fighting it. And that's something we should all think about, new things coming to us, how to use, how to get the best of it instead of ignoring or fighting it.
Thank you, Gintautas. That was very, very nice. Alison, last word?
I'm just going to be a little bit gloomy because I think that we are constantly ignoring the cost of education here. We want more preschool, we want higher quality teachers in the schools, and we are talking all the time about a hugely labor-intensive activity. Yes. And however good ChatGPT is, I mean, we had MOOCs. What happened to MOOCs? They were going to revolutionize the world. That was online courses. So I do think that in thinking about the whole of education, one of the things we need to definitely do is to think about how to make it more efficient, because there is, if you're an economist, you know about the cost disease. Teachers are going to become more expensive. Academics are going to become more expensive. If we want to maintain quality, this is going to be a huge challenge, not just for Lithuania, for all of us. And so on a typically gloomy wolf family note, sorry, I'm married to Martin.
Because, you know, Alison, because if it was 20 years ago, people say, we'll solve it. Why? Because defense expenditures will go down, we'll have more money to education, and here come the Russians. So defense is coming.
But also, finally, you have a wonderful country here, and Vilnius is fantastic.
Thank you, Alison. Artūras?
Well, I will veer off a bit of the mainstream discussion. Universities are forward-looking institutions, I hope, by definition, and we had a broader leadership meeting, deans, vice deans, the rectorate, heads of offices, the departments, and we discussed, what are the interdisciplinary topics we need to address. And one of the topics came up, which I really liked, and which I don't think we address it enough, We talk about production, about fast pace of change, about all things we need to do, but we don't talk enough about human resilience. So that the educational institutions, schools and universities, they need to address that issue as well. How do you survive in this crazily complex world? How do you manage complexity, And I think the institutions of education, which are basically created to think about things, not only to do things, but to think about things more, they can deliver that role. This is a very fresh thinking. It's not very, polished, but that was our thinking,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nerijus, please.
Coming back to the second panel that was happening in the first front, I would agree that inclusive growth in the universities cannot happen without inclusive growth in general education. And every single year now we have students, 10, 50%, sometimes 20, that finish school after 12 years of general education, not meeting even the minimum requirements that are needed after school. I really like the idea that in 2050, our vision of Lithuania, we added the goal not to have students like these. So I honestly believe that if we would go just towards this one measure, the only thing to count, none of the students should finish the school without minimal requirements. We might not have this division that we're talking about.
Thank you very much. Nerijus?
Yeah, we spoke a lot about universities, major universities investment, but also I want to remind that before universities we have secondary and primary education. Yes, and it's foundation. Maybe it's hard to see because it's foundation, but it is. And for young people, we shaping our society in the schools. Empathy, social sensitive person, how they grow and how democratic they will be citizens. So it's impossible after 12 years of autocracy to flourish democratic and free kids. So, and in universities after 12 years of stress, maybe we're losing first year because they get freedom for the first time in their life and they go to bars. So not to lose first year in university, we need to pay attention to primary education.
Well, I think we had an exciting discussion. I want to thank Minister Gintautas. I want to thank Alison, Une, Artūras, and Nerijus. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.